Welcome to Agatha Christie She Watched, our spoiler-heavy look at the movie and TV adaptations of the mystery genre's greatest writer. I'm Bill Peschel of Peschel Press, publisher of the annotated novels of Agatha Christie, and today we're talking about incompetent reporters, incompetent investigators, louche playwrights, and Bridgette Bardot lookalikes. It's Jeux de glaces, the French television adaptation of They Do It with Mirrors, from the series Petits Meurtres d'Agatha Christie. I botched that one, darn it. We're going to keep rolling, though. But first, let me introduce my partner in marriage as well as crime of the fictional kind, Teresa Peschel. Teresa, how you doing?
Hi, love. Here I am in your little office under the stairs, and we're looking at the fifth adaptation of They Do It with Mirrors, or it's often titled Murder with Mirrors. The novel was very loosely used for the Margaret Rutherford film Murder Ahoy, which actually takes place on board a boys' training ship in which young men are supposed to develop spines, but it's used as a secret Fagany operation. And that adaptation, and it's very, very loose, that's the only thing it has to do with the novel, that film is the only adaptation that really ran with the Lewis Saracold subplot. And then we saw Helen Hayes with Leo McKern and Betty Davis. And that movie is worth watching just to see Helen Hayes, Leo McKern, and Betty Davis. And there's also a fiery crash at the end where the evil psychiatrist drives off in what looks like a Ford Pinto pony, and the way it explodes, it must have been. It was either that or a gasoline tanker.
The 1985 version of Murder with Mirrors, that was it.
Yes, they keep changing the title back and forth, and when we publish my reviews, we're going to have a very complicated index because it's going to give all the possible permutations of the titles. So even if you think, oh, they've never filmed what Mrs. McGillicuddy saw, you'll be able to look up that title and say, oh, that was always filmed, but under the English title of 450 from Paddington.
You are correct. That is the version, because I'm looking at the sequence of pictures now of the guy driving off in the car. He trades shots with the gate guard, and he drives directly towards the gate.
Runs into the gate, if I remember correctly.
Runs into the gate, and it explodes like a 72 Pinto.
Or a gasoline tanker.
From the front as well. You don't usually find explosions of gas bombs in the front of a car unless you're talking maybe a Volkswagen.
I don't know. It's pretty amazing.
It was amazing.
It's pretty amazing.
And then there were the two from the various Marple series.
Yes, there was the one with Joan Hickson. That one doesn't particularly stand out in... Oh, I remember now. That one, the way they filmed it, it was obvious. If you were paying any attention whatsoever, you knew how the murder had been done within, like, the opening sequence. Because it was so obvious. That was a very flawed production for Joan. It was her last film as Miss Marple, and it was a really sad goodbye, not the swan song that she deserved for her wonderful performances. It was just really not well done. And then there was the Marple, ITV's Marple, and that was Julia, I think. Julia McKendricks. Mackenzie. With Joan Collins, because they really went with Ruth, Carrie Louise's sister, who was a flamboyant, dramatic socialite, and Joan Collins was just perfect for the role. One of the things that's really, really interesting about watching these films, where you take the same source material and you have a different scriptwriter and a different director and different actors and different producers, is the different things that they emphasize. And I have to say, of the four versions that I have seen, and I do include Margaret Rutherford, despite the fact that it is incredibly loosely associated with within hailing distance, and that's about all you can say, is that this version, this is episode 1 of season 2, where we are introduced to, I'm going to mangle the French, Commissaire Laurence, Alice Avril, and Marlene, the secretary. This is the very first one, and this introduces them to us, and I guess they did a good job of introducing you to them, because you get the inappropriately bright, bouncy music that sounds like a sitcom, and they chose to do something completely different from the other four versions, and that is they made Carrie Louise complicit in the murders. She was the evil mastermind behind it all. By the time we reached that point, I was just aghast, agog. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Any of the other versions, if you want to see something that's more true to the novel, despite all of the changes that every single production makes, any of the other versions is truer to the novel, with the possible exception of Murder Ahoy, because Carrie Louise didn't show up in that one. This was a very good introduction to season 2. Remember, the French Little Murders, season 1 takes place in the mid-1930s, whereas season 2, in the same location, takes place at the very end of 1959, heading into the 1960s. It's in the same location, but a completely different cast. And then season 3, again, takes place in the exact same location, but now it has been moved forward into the mid-70s, and again, you have a completely different cast. And so this episode sets you up with Commissaire Laurence, Alice Avril, and Marlene the secretary. You get the bright, bouncy, inappropriate music that is saying, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, look, 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 oh, isn't this going to be cute? Oh, isn't this going to be funny? You're supposed to laugh now. Ha 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 ha. I don't normally pay any attention to the score, but it was so irritating. They have this incredibly cute animated introduction, which was much more irritating than the season 1 was, and I can't tell you why, but it was just more irritating because it was like, oh my god, this is so cute and so fun. Look, these people are being strangled. Oh, these people are being knifed. Isn't this funny?
This animated opening shows the 3 main characters, and they're driving to their various crime scenes where people are getting shot, they're getting stabbed, they're getting hung, and the way that it's all done, it's almost like if you played the Paper Mario games. It's exactly what it looks like. Just like that. And there's something really inappropriate about it. I guess it's supposed to be it's playing murder for comedy, and it's not really, but I guess that's just their French, and that's been my go-to phrase for anything we've encountered that's just like, why are they doing it this way? Well,
because they're French.
They're French.
Just like there were some things with the Japanese adaptations, and you look at it and think, why are they doing that? Oh, because it's Japanese.
But at least there, it's more like, oh, you understand the culture that's driving it. This is just kind of strange.
It was strange. It was weird.
It's all the French stereotypes of the emphasis on beautiful women and sex, and more beautiful women and sex, and inappropriate behavior with beautiful women and sex, and... How can we get rid of those stereotypes if they keep indulging in it?
They started changing from the very beginning with Jeux de glaces, Murder with Mirrors. I'm not even going to try. From the very beginning, you see Carrie Louise, and I'm going to stick with the English names, other than when I'm forced to go with the French names. But Carrie Louise and her husband, Louis Sericold, and he's hubby number 2 in this iteration. He's running the reform school. These boys are older. They did not look like boys. They looked like young men. When in every other version that I've seen, they found teenage actors. None of these guys were teenagers. All of them looked like the kind of person you hoped you only met in a police lineup.
And as an example of the French approach to this, they have the Gina Hud character, and she is a Bridgette Bardot lookalike. Blonde hair. She doesn't have...
She needed her roots touched up. I noticed that every single time. Every time she came on stage, I thought, boy, does she need her roots touched. And
But the scene opens with her in the garage. Her husband is working on a car underneath the car, so he can't see. She's dancing, and she's got a bikini top on and tight shorts, and all the boys are looking.
As of course they would. Why wouldn't they? And she is practically putting on a show for them.
Oh yes, she is just bouncing around and totally unconscious of her effect on them, although obviously she does have an effect, as we find out later.
I think she knows perfectly well what she's doing, and she's fine with it, and she doesn't care.
Yeah. And one of the boys, who is apparently very mentally deficient, is creeping up to the garage door and staring at her.
And there's some contretemps with the other young men, the other young inmates, and let's just stick with inmates because that's what they are. With the other young inmates rescued from asylums and prisons where they are not being properly cared for, according to Louis Sericold. And you see this argument between the young men about, why are you spying on her?
Well, they're bullying the guy.
They're bullying
because
each
obviously
other.
He's mentally deficient.
And then you see the knife. You see the knife, and you see that young man who was staring at the Gina Hud character. He is staring at her and practically slavering all over. And he gets his throat cut. You see his throat being cut, but you don't see who kills him. The police...
Laurence.
No, not Laurence.
Oh, that's
the
right.
important policeman.
The inspector, his boss, essentially.
Yeah, the superintendent. The superintendent shows up and reassures Carrie Louise and Louis Sericole that, we are not going to get this in the papers. We'll solve this right away. And he looks at the crowd of inmates and says, it must be you. Doesn't even look at the body, doesn't do anything like this. And then Commissaire Laurence shows up, examines the body. He hasn't even been introduced to his boss yet. And his boss, who is this fat, rumpled older guy, looks at this slim, very well-dressed, very hyper-capable, hyper-arrogant
Stone face
looking at the body. Who the heck are you interfering with my crime scene? I'm your new
chief inspector, I think.
I'm your new chief inspector. Supposedly I got a promotion to this shithole. That's what they're calling it.
They didn't call it. They didn't call it that. They didn't call it a murd hole, but it's definitely That's what he meant. He is implying.
He is definitely implying that.
It.
And then he deduces, based on, and I don't know how you would be able to tell this, but he looks at the slashed throat of the inmate on the ground, and he figures out that it was from right to left or left to right, whichever direction it was, and therefore
it's from right to left, so therefore it must have been a left-handed person who did it. And there is something to that, because you're looking at where the cut starts, the angle of the cut, and the depth.
Oh, okay. So he was actually looking at something real.
It actually has some grounding in reality, one of the few instances that we see here.
And then he looks around at the crowd of inmates plus the family standing around the body, gaping.
He also accused the big guy, I think it was, the big balding guy who did it.
That's Dee Dee.
Because he had Dee Dee, who had his hands bloodied because he held the body. And he tosses the stone towards Dee Dee, who catches it in his right hand. So he's obviously not left-handed.
Yes, and then Commissioner Laurence stands up and stares at all of the young inmates and says, it has to be somebody left-handed, and he sees one person picking his teeth on his left hand. It must be you.
Right.
And this proves that he is super smart, super detail-oriented, the smartest person in the room. He's the one that's in charge, and so that is the person who gets arrested, and you never hear anything about that again. It had nothing to do with the novel. Its sole purpose was to say Commissioner Laurence is the smartest person in the room.
Yeah, and they don't follow it up with saying, well, he confessed and he's getting put away. So I kept thinking, this is part of the story.
And it's not.
And it wasn't.
It's not. It had nothing to do with anything that happened afterwards, except maybe when Raoul pulls a knife on Gina, that the reference back to the beginning scene where the other inmate got his throat slashed. At that moment, you're thinking, oh my God, they made a mistake. It was really this guy. And no, it had nothing to do with the opening sequence.
So it's not that they're French. It's just that this was not a very well-written script.
Yeah, it was not a very well-written script. And then we start meeting Alice Avril, and she is our red-headed girl reporter. She wants to be a reporter. She writes the Dear Abby column, the agony column in the local newspaper. Remember, this is supposed to be about women struggling against the patriarchy, and that's one of the subtexts in this show, is how women are forced to tolerate the sexism and the general piggishness of the men, and Alice Avril is incompetent. If you want to have an explanation of why you don't have girl reporters, Alice Avril is the reason, because she didn't know what she was doing. She didn't show up on time. She didn't try to do the very best job she could. She bitched constantly about the jobs that she did get, and every time she came on stage, you got this impression she didn't know what she was doing.
Because a lot of this story is arguments between Alice and Laurence. Alice is trying to find out more information about the story, and Laurence is denying it to her. She sneaks into the house. She gets hired as a maid.
She claims that she's pregnant, and then 2 minutes later, she has forgotten the cover story that she gave to Carrie Louise.
Mm-hmm.
How incompetent can you get?
Yeah.
And she is constantly making mistakes, and again, the red hair, and you are thinking you were watching a Lucy episode. And there is not one thing that you see in her performance that makes you think, competent reporter.
Right.
This girl is going places.
We get the first murder, which will bring back Commissaire Laurence to
the second murder. This is the second murder, because remember, we already had the boy with his throat cut at the very beginning.
Right, I wasn't counting that.
Oh, yes, now we're finally getting to the novel.
To the novel murder, the first murder in the novel.
And let us not forget Marlene. Let us not forget Secretary Marlene,
right.
Because Laurence has gone to his office and met his Marilyn Monroe lookalike secretary, and you realize within seconds of him talking to her why she has her job. It is because she wears tight dresses, and she has the figure for it, and she looks like Marilyn Monroe, and she can barely type, and she can barely make coffee. And again, I'm looking at this and thinking women have held jobs as secretaries, as, important executive secretaries for decades by now. And they did it because they were competent. That was what mattered the most, because you had to get the job done. And looking at Marlene, why should you encourage women to be secretaries, to go out into the work world, if this is what you're going to get?
This is what you're competing against as well. Never mind competence. If you want to make a comedy and you want to make a workplace comedy, a crime comedy, you want to make it out of the characters themselves. In here, all we're getting are the tropes. We're getting the rather stale cliches of the dumb secretary, the dumb blonde secretary, the eager reporter who apparently is incompetent in everything, and all the comedy is going to come from that.
And if she wants to be Nancy Drew, and she's never read Nancy Drew.
That would have been funnier if she had, and there would be references to it. So at least she has something to play off of.
She treats the entire murder investigation like a game, and yet when she is faced with the reality of murder, seeing Christian Gulbranson dead on the table, finding the body, being attacked, finding Edgar's strangled body, she's practically hysterical. And then 2 seconds later, it turns back into, oh, this is cosplay.
Mm-hmm.
We're LARPing here. This is so fun. It didn't make any sense.
Let's go ahead and get into the situation very quickly, because as you know, we have the Saracolds with their reform school, and Christian Gilbranson is running the financial side for them. And he's apparently has seen something that has disturbed him very much, so he's coming out to the house to talk it over with Louis Saracold.
He doesn't want to talk to Carrie Louise yet because, as in the novel, everybody adores Carrie Louise and wants to keep her safe and secure and cosseted and in her little golden fluffy bubble, because why would you disturb Carrie Louise with reality? As always, she does have her 2 daughters, her natural daughter, Mildred, by a previous husband, and the adopted daughter, Gina. And there is a single sentence from Mildred to Gina about her antecedents, because, of course, Gina was the daughter of a terrible murderess. That's why Carrie Louise adopted her. And, of course, Carrie Louise does everything for Gina, because why would she do anything for her own daughter, Mildred, who is a disappointment in every way, because she is not super smart, and she is not gorgeous, and she is not sparkling, and she is, in fact, pretty normal, but normal doesn't cut it in this household. Christian Gulbranson discovers something in the books. And again, this is right out of the novel.
Well, he discovers something. We don't know if it's in the books yet.
This is in the novel.
Yeah.
As in the novel, he discovers something wrong with the financial books. So 2 different kinds of books here.
But do they know that when he was murdered? That was the point, because of course that's the hidden thing. Because they think that's
the MacGuffin. And I'm not sure if I'm using that word correctly.
It's the true cause of it, because Louis tells everybody that Christian thinks that Carrie Louise is being poisoned,
and he is trying to hide what it is that he has been doing, which is embezzling the money. And in this case, he's embezzling the money so that he can buy an island, a tropical island, and set up his little utopian society with prison and asylum inmates, where they will all, because they are on this tropical island under the palm trees, coconuts and breadfruit trees, dropping their fruit so that they don't even have to work to eat, that somehow this will turn into paradise on earth, a utopia.
Well, you went into much more detail than they did, and that's also a difference between this version and the other versions. You got more of a sense that they were dedicated to reforming these inmates,
even if they weren't doing a very good job. Yeah. But here they spent so much time with Alice Avril and Commissioner Laurence and Marlene the secretary, that getting to know them, that they really gave short shrift to the plot. And I have to say that the first episode of season 2 is truth in advertising. You watch the first episode, and this is what you're going to get throughout the entire season. And in fact, based on us seeing Toward Zero, which is much later in the second season's list of episodes, they get further and further and further away from any of Agatha's plots. This at least still has the main elements, not boiled down to a single sentence.
So Christian comes out, and then there's a scene that plays out that evening. He hasn't had a chance to talk to Carrie Louise. He's obviously talked to Louis, but there's been no resolution to that. So there's a scene that plays out in the evening where they're all, after dinner, they're in the main room. having their coffee, playing the piano, talking. Christian is up in his room writing a letter. And then there's a scene with Edgar Lawson, who's one of the inmates, who comes in with a gun waving it at Lewis and threatening him.
And this is right out of the novel, and
book.
You've seen it before, and they go off into the next room because Lewis brings Edgar into the next room to try and calm him down. The family hears the terrible argument, and it goes on, and then they hear the gunshots.
Well, the lights go out,
too. The lights go out. That's right. The lights go out.
That lets Walter go out. And Mr. American Fix-It Man.
Yes, and that was something else, too, is Walter is still an American. He's now Jimmy White instead of Walter Hudd, but he is still an American. And I couldn't tell in the least little bit that he was supposed to be an American. I mean, everybody is talking French, and maybe if you were actually a French citizen listening to this, you would think, oh my God, that hick from Idaho, what a terrible accent and how he is mangling the language. I couldn't tell. I have no idea. The person playing him is Shane Woodward, which does not sound terribly French as a name. So maybe he was a French-speaking American. I don't know.
He might have been. I looked him up on Internet Movie Database. He has like 24 parts, and he's played some TV stuff. He seems like an American hunk who doesn't have much more going for him than a pretty face. On the other hand, he can play bad Americans over there. I mean, I know there are some actors, they have a career in Asian cinema because they're American, they can speak the language, and they can all make him the villain. And he plays the villain in every movie, and they have a career.
Well, as I said, with Jimmy White, or with Walter Hudd, since that's his novel name, I guess a French audience would hear the accent and think, oh, God, listen to how he's mangling the language.
Yeah, there was only one reference at the end when he knocks out the playwright, and they go, oh, American.
Our Gina at one point says, about going back to America when we met in America.
But
so it does come up.
There's no play of the stereotypical American here.
Yeah, not for us, but again, the accent in France may have been a big enough clue for a French audience, but we're going with subtitles, so we don't know. We don't know. He just looks very blonde, even blonder in a way than Gina, because he doesn't have to have his roots retouched. They still have the same subplot that they've had in the novel, which is, and this is again, the stereotyping of the women. Oh my God. Gina was a slut.
Mm-hmm.
She was stereotyped as a slut. Look at my tits, although she didn't have much. Look at my body. Look at me shake my ass at you. I know how hot I am. She's flirting madly with her adoptive cousin, and that is the Alexis Restorick character. She's flirting madly with him. Walter doesn't like it. She puts on a show for all of the inmates, which they enjoy very much, and it frustrates them. And in fact, Commissioner Laurence actually comments on that, the frustration for them, but he is not a frustrated man.
That's right. Well, she tries seducing him, caging a ride in his sports car and, holding his hand and all that. And he says, I only go to bed with women I want to go to bed with.
He doesn't need to take up women like her.
Yeah.
I mean, he knows obviously that she's been around the block a time or two. And again, this dumb blonde and look how hot I am. You must fall at my feet.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so stereotyped. And it was the same way that they handled Mildred. It was so stereotyped. They deliberately made her look unattractive with the glasses, with prim clothes, with the prim hair, the prim expression. Obviously, she's not anywhere near as valued as Gina, despite the fact that she manages to stay properly dressed and not look like a slut. But she's not pretty, and she's older, and apparently she's not that super intelligent, and she's not good at money management. She has no value as a woman to anyone in this family.
Mm-hmm.
Including to her own mother. And then you finally come to Carrie Louise. And Carrie Louise is the heart of the novel, because everything revolves around her and people not wanting to upset her because she's so special and so wonderful and so fantastic and so loving and giving and everything else like that. But if you read the novel very carefully, Carrie Louise has enormous blind spots where her children are concerned, because she lavishes all of her attention on Gina because Gina is adopted, and she pays no attention to her own natural daughter, Mildred, because, well, Mildred is my own daughter, and so she knows perfectly well that she is my daughter. Her stepchildren, they all need more love and care because they're stepchildren, or they're adopted, or they're this, or they're that, but basically she comes up with 1,000 different reasons to tell Mildred, I didn't want you. I should have gotten out that knitting needle. Then you discover at the very end, I know that films have to make changes because there's a lot of novel to cram into 90 minutes. And usually what you do is you lose extra characters, extraneous characters, and boy, this one really took the axe to Agatha's list of characters, removed them wholesale. Carrie Louise gets a dramatic personality makeover because it turns out that she is not the innocent, naive victim in this. She is the mastermind. She knew that Louis was robbing the trust blind, and she wanted him to rob the trust blind because she wanted that utopian island too, because she adored Louis so much and he should have whatever it is that he wanted. And so when Christian Gulbrandsen was going to reveal the truth to the Board of Trustees, she planned the murder, using Edgar, who was dumb and gullible and suggestible. And this again shows how little Alice Avril understands about murder investigations, how even the smallest statement can be critical, because there are things that she looks but she does not see. She observes, but she doesn't understand. And so she doesn't bring any of this information to Commissioner Laurence until it's almost too late. Oh, when we were watching that scene, Carrie Louise was completely unconcerned that her husband was being menaced by a juvenile delinquent. This is kind of important. Nancy Drew would have noticed.
Just like it was important for her when she came across the gun in the piano bench that she should bring it to the police.
And she didn't.
And she didn't, not for a long while. She had an encounter with Laurence. She was ready to do it. And, of course, Commissioner Laurence, and I have to take a stick to Laurence as well because he's a terrible investigator.
He works hard at being nasty.
He is always sniping at everybody. He bounces about in an arrogant fashion. There's that one scene where he calls the family together and all he says is, "Which of you killed Gulbrandsen?"
Yes, and
I'm going to find out the
sense.
truth. And then he walks out. That's the whole scene, right?
None of this makes any sense. That felt like padding because they couldn't use enough of Agatha's own plot because they'd already jettisoned so much. They also jettisoned the entire backstory between Louis and Edgar Laurence. In this case, Edgar is not Louis's bastard son. Edgar is just another dumb, suggestible kid. And so he does not drown himself trying to escape in the pond, and Louis does not drown himself trying to rescue Edgar.
Right.
Nope. Instead, he strangles Edgar with Carrie Louise's help.
Yes, Carrie Louise looking on while Louis is strangling him. Again, this is the stupidity part of it. Alice is screaming in the barn. Laurence rushes in, sees her in the arms of the big hulking guy.
No, this was...
And, yeah.
This wasn't Walter Hudd? Oh, this was a different time.
Yeah, this was the guy. This is the guy in... Yeah,
this is
the
Dee
bald
Dee.
guy.
They see Dee Dee.
That's right, Dee Dee. And he immediately
assumes Dee
Dee
Dee is strangling Alice.
Right.
And... no, that's actually not what's happening. Dee Dee is trying to get Alice to calm down because apparently right in front of them is Edgar's body hanging from the rafter, and the police inspector, who notices everything, doesn't see the dangling body.
Until she points it out to him.
And
then he gets up on a ladder and is explaining the difference between what strangulation is and where the rope is going. And Alice is just having kittens down there, even though she's a reporter who wants to be in an investigation.
She can do murder only when she's reading about it in a cozy, and she thinks that murders are like cozies, and where there's never any blood, and there's never any body fluids, and there's never any smell, and there's never any this, and there's never any that. And he actually, at one point, he does say something about the smell of a body, how the smell of a body will change from the moment of death to half an hour later, an hour later. Again, you go back and forth between Alice thinking that she's competent, and yet every single thing you see on screen says she is incompetent. There's even a scene where he breaks into her apartment. This is the Commissioner Laurence breaks into her apartment because she was supposed to be ready to go with him to the crime scene, and she's overslept. And he walks into her apartment
after picking the front door lock.
After picking the front door lock, and it is a squalid bedsit, and she complains about, "You don't understand, I'm poor." And he holds up the dirty saucepan and says something along the lines of, "It doesn't cost any money to wash up after yourself." Which it doesn't.
Which it doesn't. They're both stinkers.
Oh, yeah.
There's this subplot involving poisoned chocolates, which he takes the box. Apparently, Carrie Louise was going to eat it. And we see somebody injecting
and that's never explained either. We assume that it was
box.
Carrie Louise, and something dramatic would have happened with the box of chocolates. But that whole thing is set up, and then it never is rewarded until you see Alice comes out and sees the car with the box of chocolates, and so of course
she's going to reach into Lawrence's car and take something that doesn't belong to her
and eat one of the chocolates.
Right. And then he catches her in time, makes her spit it out. They talk about this idea she has in which she's going to send a letter to everybody saying, I saw what you did. Meet me in the barn tonight and bring money. And he says, you're not going to do it. And he strangles her. He actually puts 2 fingers on her throat saying, if you do this, I will do this, and and let's go. She is so strangled, she's coughing afterwards.
And yet later on, when Louis and Carrie Louise strangle her, she makes a full recovery, like just instantly. And I guess it's because her vocal cords and her larynx toughened up from that little bit of exercise.
A little bit of abuse from Laurence.
And the whole thing with the chocolates, because he does eventually tell her that they're poisoned. And then she finally is like, oh my God, I have to spit this out. But we never see anything more. Who poisoned the chocolates? We don't actually know.
Yeah. Was it intentional? Because Carrie Louise was on the verge of eating the chocolates. So.
Yes, and then he swooped down and took the chocolates away before she could, and we don't know why he took the box of chocolates away, except that, of course, when chocolates arrive, they're always poisoned.
Well, he's read a lot of Agatha Christie novels.
The chocolates are always poisoned.
Absolutely. If he was there in the House of Raging Death, he would have stopped them from
eating the poisoned chocolates.
From eating the poisoned chocolates that had been sent to 2 previous mansions in the neighborhood.
That was a Tommy and Tuppence Partners in Crime episode, folks.
Yes.
But the whole poisoned chocolates box, we never know who actually did that. And the same thing, we see the gloved hand putting something in Carrie Louise's tonic bottle, and we are never shown who did that. It could have been her, or it could have been Louis.
I guess if you take it from the back end, knowing that she's involved in all this, she probably did it all along. But there's no backstory at the very end to say this is what she did. And we get to see
nothing.
her doing it.
The only thing that you get is her helping her husband to defraud the foundation and murder Christian Gulbranson and murder Edgar because he was their patsy.
Right.
And it just, oh my God. Oh my God.
It did vary wildly between CSI and I Love Lucy. It really did. Maybe Laverne and Shirley for a modern take on it. Well, modern. Oh God, I'm so old. 2 Broke Girls. How about that?
I don't even know what that is.
A TV series.
Oh, okay. I have no idea.
Whatever the modern equivalent of I Love Lucy is, this was it. And it was, oh God, it was brain-deadenly stupid.
And you know, when I think of season 1, we've seen 2 episodes in season 1. They worked. Even though they took Poirot out and turned it into a police procedural, it worked. They were serious about the murders, even though there were times when it was very funny. But they were serious about the story. They were serious about Agatha. They were serious about murder. And it worked. And here, they're not serious about following the plot. They're more concerned with Laurence, Alice, Avril, and Marlene. And they don't really care about following the plot. And they set the women up to look like fools. Every woman on screen looked like an idiot.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a lot of the men weren't any better either. But the women were deliberately set up to look stupid. Marlene was set up not as a competent secretary, and she could have been right from the get-go. Despite the fact that she is a Marilyn Monroe lookalike, she could have been a very competent secretary.
And you know, if you wanted something similar, look at WKRP in Cincinnati.
That's right, because Lonnie Anderson was the hyper-blonde secretary, but she was extremely capable.
She was capable and smart, and she knew what she was about, and that played off into comedy because you're expecting someone fluffy-headed and ditzy, and she's anything but that.
Exactly. This Marlene was the absolute stereotype of the dumb blonde secretary. I'm thinking of How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. And there were secretaries in there who you knew their purpose, and it was not secretarial work. But there were also an army of secretaries who were very good secretaries. And there was also, Joan Crawford was in this movie, The Best of Everything.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Those secretaries were professionals. They knew their jobs. Marlene was a stereotype of an incompetent, ditzy, blonde airhead. Alice Avril was a stereotype of the girl reporter who doesn't actually know anything, and she doesn't learn anything. Remember, we saw Towards Zero. which takes place much later in the sequence, and she is still a terrible reporter who doesn't seem to know what's going on, who doesn't make connections, who doesn't listen, who just instantly leaps to conclusions that turn out to be wrong every single time.
So we're not going to be seeing any more episodes, I think, in this series.
No, I'm not watching more of season 2. Life is too short for me to watch indifferent French TV. I don't care for the leering. I don't care for the way they handle Agatha. It's just too stupid. I will watch season 1.
In fact, we're going to watch Hercule Poirot's Christmas coming up.
Which takes place in season 1, but it's in a parallel universe because it turns out that the inspector there is the murderer. So...
Spoilers!
Sorry. Yes, that's a parallel universe one. But it's what got the ball rolling with the Little Murders. But I am not going to sit through any more of season 2 because the 2 episodes that I have seen, the very first one where we're introduced to the characters and one late in the sequence where it has even less to do with Agatha Christie, why should I waste my time?
And I think that pretty much sums it up. So this is another episode of Agatha Christie She Watched.
Thanks for joining us. And remember, if you check our website, peschelpress.com, you can sign up for our newsletter. You can sign up for our Instagram feed where you watch us watch the movies of Agatha Christie. And if we have an event coming up, you can see what it is.
And thank you very much, and we'll see you at the movies. Agatha Christie She Watched is Teresa Peschel and Bill Peschel. Produced by Bill Peschel. Theme song, Call to Adventure by Kevin MacLeod. New episodes come out every week wherever you stream your content. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can help support us by going to anchor.fm/mystery and leaving a 5-star rating and review, and by helping to spread the word. To advertise on Mystery She Watched, email Peschel at peschelpress.com. All questions and comments can be emailed to Peschel at peschelpress.com. And thank you for listening.